Hello and welcome to GreenFleet Talks. My name's Kate Armitage and I'm your host for our discussion today. And I'm delighted to be joined again by Darren Gardner, who is Country Manager for UK and Ireland at Keba, one of the largest wallbox suppliers in Europe. Hi, Darren.
Hi, Kate. Good to be here again.
Good to see you again in sunny Bicester.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Darren, today we're focusing very much on SMEs and we're going to be considering some of the challenges that fleet decarbonisation poses for them.
Yes.
So I would like to start discussing the delay to the end of the sales date for new petrol and diesel vehicles to 2035. And it may be a welcome relief to quite a lot of SMEs, but do you think there are any risks involved in SMEs delaying that switch to electric vehicles?
Yeah. Okay. Great question. I think the big risk is confusion. It's confusing enough already for everybody, whether you're a fleet manager of a very large corporate or you're an MD, finance director of a really small distribution logistics business with maybe a small fleet of 20 vehicles. It's confusing because for all of those people, but in particular small businesses, you don't know, should you do it? And if so, how? And if you do it, what type of vehicles should you go for? How many charging points do you need? Where do you charge? All of these sorts of things. And one of the sort of drivers, to excuse the pun, was this sales date of 2030. So despite the confusion, the MD or the finance director of these smaller businesses, we've got to do it. Even though it's confusing, we've got to do it. So now there's this sort of 5-year pause, which then just, in all the other things that I've got to do in running my business, running a warehouse or a manufacturing plant, I can just forget about this EV thing for a few more years. So I think that's the risk, is that actually from an environmental perspective, you just kick the can down the road. And even from a commercial, financial perspective, you just actually kick the can down the road because, frankly, these stakeholders have got other things to do, like run a business. So I think that's the risk, is that ultimately SMEs, small, medium enterprises, will need to electrify their fleet, and they will do so anyway, but they will just now delay it by a few more years, maybe. Or there's still an opportunity, and we must keep the conversation alive. I suppose the one good thing is that the quotas, the sales quotas from that the government have put in for the manufacturers still remain. So I think it's this year's 22% of all vehicles that need to be sold are electric, 36% the year after. So what that really means is there are going to be some really great deals for those businesses, large or small, and that might be the flip side. Is that, the MD or the FD might go, this is still a pain, and I want to kick it down the road, but this deal is too good to be true, and maybe that sort of means that they still go for it. So I think that the big risk, to answer your question directly, is confusion and kicking the can down the road, but hopefully not.
Well, Darren, you've made such a valid point. I mean, first of all, SMEs don't have a dedicated person necessarily who's doing this. This is part of a much broader job.
Yeah.
So, as you say, just coming to grips with the technology and how it works and will it work for them is a big enough challenge without then having dates moving. And you're absolutely right that the headline message that the ban on ICE vehicles has been pushed back to 2035 is misleading because of the ZEV mandate. So it's sort of lulling SMEs into a false sense of security a little bit, because come 2029, 2030, the availability of ICEs isn't going to be there, and they may be be directed towards the bigger fleets potentially. So, or if they are available, they may be coming at a premium, which suddenly means that they're under financial pressure by not switching to electric. So,
exactly.
Yeah, really, really great point, Darren. And now we also talk specifically with SMEs, and I think this is part of the same problem. This kind of lack of time and knowledge, and also the cost of EVs are often reasons that for SMEs not to begin this electrification journey. What advice would you give SMEs to help them with that kind of knowledge gap and potentially that funding?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would do if I was a small business is go and talk to somebody, an industry expert. That could be a neighbouring business around the corner who's already done this, or it could be a really big. I know lots of big corporate fleet managers who would probably be willing to to help their local community out in terms of some of the problems that they faced and the challenges that they faced and how they overcame them. So I think the first thing I would suggest is reach out to your peers, either small businesses in the local area who've done it, and find out how you could do it, or pick up the phone to a really big fleet manager in the local area and see if you can get a group of smaller businesses to go and chat to the big corporate up the road and find out how they did it. So I think the first thing would be to do that. If none of that works, then I'm happy for them to contact me, or probably you, Kate. But talk to people in the industry. I joked about me, but they could talk to people like me who've done this in previous businesses, and this is what we do day in, day out. Is ultimately helping people transition to electric vehicles. So whether I suppose what other things to consider is what's your fleet at the moment? How many miles are you doing? What's the payload of those vehicles? What what's the average trip in terms of mileage that you're doing? That all sort of determines the profile of the fleet and whether you need to charge at home, back at base, or on the go if you're doing lots of miles. Then the next bit would be to consider the hardware. So if you're mostly charging back at base and it's overnight, then you don't really need a fast charge. You need a slower charge. Those are the sorts of things that I would research into. Go and talk to a hardware manufacturer at this point. Then the other thing then to think about then is the software side of things. The hardware needs to be connected to a platform to do all sorts of things, from potentially billing drivers to managing the RFID cards to stop and start a charge, all of that type of stuff, load balancing. And then I would go and talk to a platform provider. There are loads out there. I'm not sure I can name any names, but if I can, then maybe you can tell me. But just Google OCPP platform providers, and I'd go and talk to those sorts of organizations. I go and talk to lots of people, talk to hardware people, talk to software people, talk to people that have already done it. And then probably, I guess, you're going to have to spend a little bit of money and pay a consultant to help design an actual project.
Or possibly not, Darren. I think it depends on the size of the fleet. If I think it's the bigger fleets that need that support.
That's true.
I mean, there's absolutely stacks of advice there. Key message is talk to people, talk to your peers, talk to industry experts. GreenFleet. Clearly, we run a lot of webinars. We run events. We run live events. GreenFleet Talks is a great way just to kind of bring your knowledge up. So that's all great, And
it really is. I would say, Kate, as well. It's really not that difficult, actually, in the grand scheme of things. We supply to lots of smaller. We supply to installers, to electricians primarily, and they put in the infrastructure for small businesses. And really, most of those businesses start out with 2 or 3 or 4 charging points maximum, and it's not a complicated thing. Once you've worked out, okay, what car do you want or what van do you want, where do you want your charging points, and have you got the money to pay for them? It's not that much of a difficult conversation after that, in reality.
I would say so. And I've always said that SMEs are actually in this really golden position where if the MD can see that the vehicles will work for them, they can move very quickly on this. And reap a lot of benefits because the running costs are so much cheaper. Now, you mentioned a bit of jargon. So you mentioned hardware, you mentioned software. You said you've got to have software, which didn't used to be the case. But because now we have the smart charging bill, you have to have a communications enabled charge point. Is that right? But there are benefits of having that, as you say, because it gives you the reporting, it helps you track consumption, you can get remote diagnostics from that, and you can potentially give access to employees and bill them if they're using the infrastructure. So I think there's a lot there. You mentioned OCPP. Just for our audience, SMEs, not their day job, might not be fully familiar with that. Do you want to explain that?
OCPP is Open Charge Point Protocol. It's a language that enables hardware to talk to software, and you want 1.6 or above to keep it simple. Most operators are on 1.6, and that's absolutely fine. Some people will talk about 2.01. That's really interesting, but it's future. So yes, but it enables the car, the vehicle, and the charging point to talk together.
Great. Thank you, Darren. I knew the answer, by the way,
did.
but I think for our audience, it's always good to make sure that we've covered these things.
Well, why that's also important is because, particularly if you're not an energy manager or a fleet manager, and you're operating a small fleet, 2 or 3 chargers, and if the charging point fails, the automatic thing to blame is the charger, and it's usually the communication protocol that has fallen down between those 3 things: the car, the charging point, or the platform. And so getting a reliable charger and a reliable platform that talk to each other, that's the really key thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course it's worth saying that Keba produce wall boxes that are OCPP compliant.
They do, yes. Thank you for that sales pitch.
Okay.
Very good ones as well.
Right. So we've talked about zero emission vehicles, but there are other ways that SMEs can reduce their emissions from their transport operations. Can you just give me your thoughts on other strategies?
On how they reduce their transport emissions? Yes, I mean, I think, I mean, I'm not an expert in payload, but obviously take into account payload and route planning and efficiencies in that. Make sure that if you have the opportunity to use on-site power generation from renewable sources, then that's really key. But if you haven't, then also I'm sure people are doing this anyway, is look for a 100% renewable energy tariff. Those sorts of things that you can do. And then again, this plays into the OCPP platform piece again, is that you can, with the right platform and the right contracts in place, you can do something called demand side response, and you can essentially optimize your vehicle batteries, your energy that's generated on site, to be able to essentially charge your vehicles at the cheapest and cleanest time on the grid. And that's probably the thing that you want to look out for. If you're a small business and this is all a headache, don't worry about that for a minute.
I agree.
But that's where you could get to, where you start to see that your vehicles are actually mini power stations, and there's something incredibly cool environmentally and commercially that you can do with that. But that's probably how I would reduce my transport emissions, other than not driving anywhere. but you got to.
Of course, green travel plans and all that great stuff, and getting the train rather than driving. But it is food for thought. All the great stuff that you can do with vehicle to grid, and as you say, even smart charging overnight when the electricity tends to be lower carbon intensity. Just there's some natural synergies there. But you are right. For an SME, if you are kind of time or knowledge constrained, these are we're really talking about the icing on the cake here, aren't we? The vehicles themselves do the heavy lifting in terms of reducing emissions. So, yeah. Darren, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much, and thank you, of course, to Keba for joining GreenFleet Talks.
Thank you very much for your time.
Great, thank you. That is all we've got time for. Thank you for watching. Please tune in to GF365 again soon.